IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm Manoj Kewalramani, and I have with myself today my colleague Kingshuk Saha, who works with Takshashila's Indo-Pacific Studies program. Kingshuk, welcome to this conversation.
Thank you, Manoj.
So what we thought we'd do today is to have a conversation about the deteriorating state of India-Canada relations and not try to explain a little bit about what has happened that has led to this freeze in the relationship, and where are we at currently, because it's been more than a couple of months that we have seen the relationship in a downward spiral. But we wanted to also focus on the implications that this has for the broader Indo-Pacific region, and of course Canada's engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, because Canada also fairly recently came up with an Indo-Pacific strategy, which we had covered in an earlier conversation. So, Kingshuk, let me begin by first asking you to help us just go through what has exactly happened and why are India and Canada in this difficult place that they are today.
Yeah. So, thank you for this question. And as you said, no, like it is not something that has started now. So, the immediate provocation, if you see, was on 18th September when Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in their parliament said that they have credible allegation. Please understand the word used was credible allegation, not involvement or any such thing or evidence. He said credible allegation about India's involvement in the assassination of one of Canadian citizen, and the Canadian citizen in question is has a dubious past, and India he is considered as a terrorist because he leads Khalistan Tiger. So that is a terrorist organization that had been branded as a terrorist organization in India. So that was the starting point, and that is a very serious allegation you make. So that was one reason, starting point, and that led to the Canada expelling one of Indian senior diplomat from Canada, and India in response expelling them. That was followed by India expelling a number of Canadian diplomats. Technically, it was not expelling. India said we want to maintain a parity with Canada. Like, so by parity, I mean like that equal number of diplomats should be in both countries. And in India, there were more Canadian diplomats than Indian diplomats were in Canada. And this was followed by in September, India halting all the visas for Canadian citizen to India. So this is the immediate provocation. But if you want to understand this issue, we need to go little back in the past. So this is something that has been a thing of concern for India about the rise of Khalistani extremism in Canada. Like there have been other places, be it in USA, UK, or Australia, but Canada had been the hotbed of this Khalistani extremism, and about which India is very sensitive. Like as you and our listener will be and viewers will know that India had a very bloody history of separatism in the state of Punjab. Lot of people lost their life, and it is a sensitive issue. So when Justin Trudeau had come before during his last visit to India, the then Chief Minister of Punjab, Amarinder Singh, had given him a list of all the terrorists operating from Canada with evidence. No action was taken. And even before, if you look at the history, like one of the worst aviation act of terrorism before 9/11 was in 1985 when the bombing of one Indian Airlines by terrorists of Babar Khalsa International that killed 329 people, and more, and I think two-thirds were Canadian citizens. So that is the legacy. So from there we are coming. So moving forward,
This is this is
yeah.
really interesting that that there is obviously a historical legacy of the Khalistani separatist movement and the presence of elements that are linked to the Khalistani separatist movement in Canada. Of course, the increasing presence of groups linked to that movement and their own internal strife, along with their influence in Canadian domestic politics. All of those sort of create this cocktail for the relationship to essentially be so deeply strained. And like you said, it's not the first time that we are seeing this. Obviously today the intensity of the differences is extremely strong, but it's not the first time. I mean, there was also some sort of a freeze between 2020 and 2022. This was about over a number of issues, including things like attacks on Indian origin people and establishments by Khalisani groups in Canada. Um, Trudeau's comments about the farm bill protests in India, and India's cancellation of diplomatic talks in response. Um, and all of this was sort of brewing for quite some time. And this case of Nijar, the Khalisani activist, terrorist, and Canadian citizen who was killed, sort of led this to boil over. Just to add some more context for people who might not be aware, um, in 2022 there was all this talk about a secessionist referendum being held in Canada, a Khalisani secessionist referendum, and Delhi had objected to that. So just to know that there is long context and even more recent context to it, with the proximate cause being the death of this one individual, but also that in 2023 things were seemingly getting better. We had a foreign minister level dialogue earlier in the year, which came on the heels of Canada releasing its Indo-Pacific strategy. And India had welcomed that Indo-Pacific strategy, basically making the case that, look, this is an opportunity for us to work together. The ministers met talking about economic relationships, security cooperation, people to people ties, and so on and so forth. So there was some sort of a thaw that was emerging, but it was obviously these underlying tensions seem to have scuttled that thaw. So, Kingshuk, I want to understand from you, what exactly, how does Canada view the Indo-Pacific as a region, and what was its view of India in the region, and and its desire to cooperate with India within that context?
Yeah, thank you, Manoj, for this question. And if you remember, I think in one of our podcasts, we discussed about Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. For
Exactly.
Canada, for Canada, not even for Canada, for the world as such, for the all major players, like Indo-Pacific region is emerging as a new hub because it has over 40 economics, over 4 billion people, and it's worth around 47 to 50 trillion worth of economic activity. So everyone want to get hand in this pie. And for Canada, it is more specific. Like being a Pacific nation, it want to connect with Indian Ocean region, and this is where India comes into the picture. And if we see that Canada is not only interested in Indo-Pacific region, but also in India. So in their Indo-Pacific strategy paper, there's a dedicated section for India. Like as we know, like India sent the highest number of students to Canada, that is around 40%. And Indian community is one of the fastest growing in Canada. So say in last 10 years, out of every 5 immigrant to Canada, one is an Indian. That is, having said that, also, like if you look at the economy, Canadian economy and Indian economy, as of now, in India is the 10th largest economic partner of Canada, and FDI from Canada is not that high in India. It is only 0.56%. But having said, there is a huge potential between these two countries. India is not only the fifth largest economy, but also it is one of the fastest growing economy. And I think, like, it won't be wrong to say it is the among the large economy, it is the fastest growing. So India present a huge market for Canada. Not only like Canada's strength lies in its agriculture products, raw materials and energy, for which in India there's a huge demand. And also, like, as Canada is a huge country with a less population, they require skilled manpower, and India is one of the countries that can provide it. So the relation was mutually beneficial. Apart from the mutual disagreement that had led to mutual suspicion, but having, if you see, like India and Canada, we have a long history. That is, both are liberal societies, democratic societies, and India has always been a multicultural society, and Canada is also slowly became. So these were the common thing. Even now, in the present context, when there is a mutual suspicion between the two countries at political level, but there's an apprehension among the common people, how it will affect them, because they want more people to people relation interaction. So in that context, India is very important for Canada, and Canada even recognized that. So as I have told you just now, for that one whole section was dedicated, like, and for that matter, like, in today's
Yeah,
world, if yeah.
yeah, I agree.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
If you look at the document and how it talks about how Canada is engaged in the region, it talks about specifically China and India, and it commits on certain things, right? It primarily with India, it talks about strengthening the economic relationship, um, and it talks about the strengthening people-to-people relationship, and it says that India's strategic importance and leadership, both across the region and globally, will only increase as India becomes much more prominent and its economy continues to grow. And therefore, Canada is seeking to engage in dialogue with India. Yet, we are seeing obviously a situation where some of these values that you're talking about and that the document also talks about, both sides are clearly at odds with each other on this, right? Both sides, the argument is that, I mean, and Justin Trudeau's most recent comment about how, well, if you allow big countries to get away with violating the rule of law, then you're not really going to get anywhere. And India's pushback on that, saying, Jaishankar was recently in Britain, and his comments about how no evidence of any Indian agent being involved in any activity of this nature that Canada has alleged has been presented to India, and that India would be open to engaging. India would be open to sort of discussing some sort of a probe, but nothing has been provided. If I was to quote him, he said something to the effect of, Canada has not shared any evidence against Indian agents being involved in the murder of Khalisani separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, as it has been publicly alleged. So it becomes really difficult uh, to cooperate and to do all these great things if you are in a position where you are where such serious allegations have been made, and you're so deeply interlinked with each other's domestic politics because of this specific issue. So, is it? I mean, how does one even get past this, right? Because you will have to see political change for there to be movement, or at least some cooling of temperatures, perhaps through a joint investigation or something, or perhaps with some commitment from the Canadian side about taking tougher positions on separatists and things like that. But then that links to their own domestic politics, right? So how do you get past this?
Yeah. Manoj, as you have pointed out, the domestic play, something about which I want to dwell on first, then I'll come to the second part, how to get past it. So, if you look at the Canadian politics and the presently, Justin Trudeau's is running a minority government, and he is dependent on the New Democratic Party that is led by Mr. Jasmeet Singh. He is a known diehard Khalistani supporter. That is one part. Secondly, I think 2 days back there was one legal poll for Canadian press. In this poll, it was found out of every three Canadian, two Canadians are dissatisfied with the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and they would like to see him resign before the next poll. So this is the context. In this context, like, he is dependent upon his coalition partner, and which forms a number of like, that is New Democratic Party, and who among their supporters has some radical six element. So this diaspora has a very strong effect, especially in Canadian politics, as we have seen now. Be it the Indian diaspora, like, people only think there are only six, but if you look at the Canadian population, like, six represent only 1.9% of the population, but they're active in politics. There are people from other, but as they are represented in different walks of life, especially in politics, their number far, their voice outweight far their numbers. So this is one thing. So even commentators or Canadians are saying that local politics had held is holding hostage the India Canada relation. Something that can be, if we look at Canadian history, we can see the impact of diaspora. Earlier, it was the Tamil diaspora, how it was shaping Canada's foreign policy towards Sri Lanka. Now we can see regarding Ukraine, or for that matter, China. So all this, there's a local domestic compulsion in Canada. Also, like, India is heading for election in next year. So for now, I think the both countries need to act far more in a pragmatic and in a nimble manner. So it should not be like, let the diplomat do their work. It should not be played out in gallery and through the press. Like, as you have rightly pointed out, Justin Trudeau made a statement. Like, if big countries are not following rules so of the law, how other country will follow? Even for that matter, during his bilateral uh, 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 interaction with UAE and Jordan, he has raised the issue of India's so-called involvement in this Niger killing. So these were out of context. I think, as you have said, maybe both the countries can talk in a discreet manner and see how they can resolve the issue, because it is in the interest of both the countries to move ahead and resolve the dispute. India is
Okay.
yeah,
So if I'm getting it right, your argument is that both countries need to look at strategic interests,
precisely.
and put past them some of these domestic challenges, because in the interest of sort of broader strategic environment that they are both facing, and try to move past them, given what they otherwise have to do. Okay. I wanted to sort of move, and you're also arguing that it's best to do some of this more discreetly than to be playing for each other's galleries. I would contend that it is very difficult to do this discreetly, particularly with elections around the corner for both sides. So it's only perhaps likely that this will happen discreetly as elections fade into the background for both countries. But my final question to you, Kingshuk, is around the role of the United States. The US is a close partner for India, but it is an extremely close ally for Canada. Canada has bit the bullet for the US most recently with regard to China on the Huawei Meng Wanzhou case. Uh, it was essentially in the firing line because of that decision by the Trump administration. Um, and they are very close allies. They are NATO allies, they are neighbors, they are Five Eyes allies. And there was sufficient hints being dropped and information being leaked, which suggested that, information from other partner countries played a role in Canada's determination of the allegation that Justin Trudeau made. So there was likely some degree of intelligence sharing also in this regard. What role can the US play, if any, in trying to diffuse this tension?
I think, like as you said, like for US, Canada is a very close ally, but also a neighbor with whom it shares a huge border and undefended border. And India is fast emerging as a close ally in its quest to extend like contain China. And India is a key ally in Indo-Pacific region. So for US, this has put US in a tight situation. But having said that, like US can encourage both the countries, as I said just now, to to have a discussion whereby they can clear their like differences in a professional, discreet manner, rather than washing their dirty laundry in the public. Also, like there were some report that that US would take action against India, or it would impact India US relation. But if you see the recently like 2+2 dialogue between India and US, when US Secretary of State and US Defense Secretary were in India. So during the press release, like Indian Foreign Secretary said, yeah, there was a discussion regarding Canada. Like, so we express our concern about the rise of extremism, and while the US side said India need to, cooperate with Canada in this investigation. So as of now, what appears like US is walking a very fine line. So it has to be seen, would it be able, to mediate between its two, one old ally and neighbor, and one new emerging ally and friend. So how US does this would be something that to be seen.
I think that's really interesting point that you brought up. That the American side did talk about, bring up this issue of Canada and the relationship with Canada in the 2+2 dialogue. And I think that's important because once you have this issue being raised at that level, and there is discussion that, hey, look, we need to, both sides need to try and talk about this, and both of you need to engage in perhaps a joint investigation of some side. I think the Indian side said, like you made the point that Foreign Secretary Vinay Kwatra said that that the US side understands India's concerns with regard to the Khalistani threat from Canada. But I think that it's important that the Americans are making the argument that both need to be engaged in some sort of a joint investigation. Then that can be a bit of a face saver for both sides, because it can allow both Canada and India to make the case that, look, we both tried to address it together, and that's the mature thing to do, rather than trying to, like you said, air dirty laundry in public. So clearly, the Americans are playing some sort of a role, but there is limited, like you said, that they can do, given that one is a historical ally and the other is a new partner in the making, and a important actor from the American interest perspective in the Indo-Pacific. So I guess interesting times ahead for the India-China relationship and the implications for that for the Indo-Pacific. Yes, Kingshuk.
Manoj, like I'm really tempted to, as I'm talking with you, to bring in China also. Like I know we are talking about Canada-India relation, but it was in context of Indo-Pacific region. So, like how Chinese are seeing this, the dispute between India and Canada. So, what are
Yeah, I
they
mean,
thinking? Like, if you'd like to share.
so from my perspective, I think what Beijing will be looking at is it would be pleased with the friction. And I think there is also messaging from China, which is around the fact that, look, the West is fundamentally going to bully you, and the West will fundamentally try and coerce you. So, from an Indian point of view, hey, look, this is what you get for partnering with the West, and you get pressure, you get interference in your domestic politics, and we've said that to you many times. That's what the Chinese messaging to India has been. But I think they're generally just watching this closely to try and see how things develop, how things evolve, what the United States does, to see whether there are any deeper frictions or fissures that emerge between the US and India. I think China's own relationship with Canada has been quite fraught, like I said, owing to
Yeah.
the Meng Wanzhou case. And that continues to be the case. And like you said, there's also diaspora politics from a Chinese perspective that's happening in Canada, which also sort of is a source of friction between the two sides. So from their point of view, I think they're watching this in the context of the fact that does it lead to any significant strategic misgivings between the US and India in particular, because that I think would be their primary source of concern and interest. So to me, I think that's what Beijing is essentially watching. All right, so I think we've had a wide-ranging discussion. We've tried to talk about how this development and deterioration of the India-Canada relationship impacts the Indo-Pacific, but also what are the ways in which different actors, India, the United States, and Canada, can try and find ways out of the current situation, and perhaps how difficult it is to do that given the nature of domestic politics. At the end of the day, all foreign policy is an extension of domestic politics and policies. And this example, I think, underscores that more than anything else. With that, Kingshuk, thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you so much all for listening.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.